I'm going to start in 2 minutes.
You ever had Haagen-Dazs ice cream?
If I ever had Haagen-Dazs, no.
Delicious. Kosher.
Why is it not
Delicious.
working?
Be right back.
Okay. Okay, everyone. Doing great. The whole beauty of Zoom is that we can see each other, no?
That all depends on how you look at the moment.
No pressure.
It's more respectable.
Yeah. So we're starting today a once a week on Tuesday nights. Very excited about it because this is a class that I used to give, and before COVID, and even way before then, in other words, it was a class that I gave years ago, and I'm excited. It's a new year now. Although it's a couple of weeks into the new Torah cycle, we started reading Bereshis 2 years. This week we're already in the and we'll put it on all forms of social media, whether it's Zoom or Facebook and so on. So welcome everyone who is watching, whether it's on Facebook or on Zoom. We're going to be starting. So this week's Torah portion is the third portion, as I mentioned. The first portion of the Torah is Bereshis, and Bereshis goes from creation of the whole world. This is from Maimonides in the book of Mishnah Torah. It's a short section. Rabbi tells us, and we all know it, that Abraham was the first believer in God in his day and age. In his time, he lived in a world that was steeped in idol worship. And what is idol worship? A lot of people are not, they think people bow to stones, and how could that happen? How could people be so foolish? And how could a whole society become so, fall into such a silly type of behavior and service and worship and so on? So the Rambam describes to us that it didn't start off as a just simple idol worship, you bow to a stone. It was much, much more sophisticated than that. And I want to just read a few sections because it's important. So just to set to give the context. Adam had a son. Adam, joining? Good, sure. Take this. Adam had lived 930 years. When he was 130 years old, he had his third son, a man by the name of Seth. As you'll remember, Adam had two sons first. He had them right away. As soon as he was created, he gave birth to two children. His wife gave birth to two children, Cain and Abel. And because of what happened with Abel, that he was killed, and there was the world was degenerating into bad behavior, he decided not to have any more children. But at 130 years old, he decided that he's going to have a third child. He wasn't convinced, and he had a third child, a man by the name of Seth. This Seth had a child whose name was Enosh. And in his time, in the days of Enosh, the Rambam tells us like this. And I want to read this, it's on the screen, so please follow. And those who are watching on Facebook, I'll do it as easy as possible so you can follow. It's not very difficult, but it's just a couple of texts. Rambam says, during the time of Enosh, mankind made a great mistake. And the wise men of that generation gave thoughtless counsel. Enosh himself was one of those who erred. Their mistake was as follows. They said God created stars and spheres with which to control the world. That means God created the sun, the moon, all those things. He placed them on high and treated them with honor, making them servants who minister before him. Accordingly, it is fitting to praise and glorify them and treat them with honor. These people perceived this to be the will of God. Blessed be he. That they magnify and honor those whom he magnified and honored. Just as a king desires that the servants who stand before him be honored. Indeed, doing so is an expression of honor to the king. What Rambam is saying over here is that in the beginning of time, in the days of Enosh, the grandson of Adam, the people began to think as follows. God created the sun. The sun is such a powerful such a powerful star, a powerful planet, gives warmth, it gives energy, it gives so much to the world. And God honored it by creating it on a high, and it was the will of God, they said, that we should show respect, so to say, to these spheres, to these planets, to these stars who give the world so much. Just like a king, if you come into the king's palace, of course you're going to honor the high ministers that are in the palace, even though they're not the king. That is the honor of the king, when you show honor to his ministers. So these people erred and thought that God too wants us to honor the sun, the moon, and so on. But this was obviously a terrible mistake. The question is why? When you think about it, why was it a mistake? After all, just to cite an example, if we're told to honor our mother and father, right? Why are we told to honor our father and mother? Because God told us to honor our mother and father because they brought us life. They give us sustenance. They give us so much. They gave us life itself. And yet, when you honor your mother and father, no one's going to say that is a dishonor to God. No one's going to say that that's a dishonor to God. Right? In fact, God himself, in the 5th of the 10 commandments, is to honor your parents. So why is it okay to honor the parents, but over here, when they said, let's honor this ministering spheres in heaven, that is a mistake? Let's continue. We'll get back to that. Rambam continues, after conceiving of this notion, they began to construct temples to the stars and offer sacrifices to them. They would praise and glorify them with words. They would prostrate themselves before them because they'd prostrate themselves before them because by doing so they would according to their false conception, be fulfilling the will of God. This was the essence of the worship of false gods. This is how it began, says the Rambam. It didn't start, they started suddenly bowing to stones and considering the stones a god. These early idol worshippers, as we call them idol worshippers, believed in God. They believed not only in God, they believed that God created the world, they believed that God was in control of the world and so on. Their mistake was that they gave credence and honor to this ministering spheres that God put that God created. And he continues here. And this was the rationale of those who worshiped them. They would not say that there is no other God except for this star. They believed in God. This message was conveyed by Jeremiah, who declared, "Who will not fear you, King of the nations? For to you it is fitting. Among all the wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you. They have one foolish and senseless notion. They conceive of their empty teachings as wood." In other words, all know that you alone are God. Their foolish errors consist of conceiving of this emptiness as your will. In other words, Jeremiah is pointing out this thing, that they made the mistake thinking that this is the will of God. After many years, continues Rambam, there arose people, false prophets, who told the people that God had commanded them to say it. Now came the false prophets who said that God communicated with them the true God. That He communicated with them and that they should tell the people to serve this star or all the stars, sacrifice to it, other libations to it, and so on and so forth. Over time, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Over time, little by little, these false prophets began to encourage people to build altars for these spheres and so on. Eventually, the original intent, which was that we should give honor to stars and to the sun and to the moon and to other things, not negating, God forbid, they didn't say that God, there was no God. They believed in God, but they said that God wants us to worship these spheres. Just like you honor your father and mother, you should honor the sun, the moon, because they give you beneficial things. Eventually, as time went on, these became the prophets of the new generation became even more devious, and they became more false, and they said there is no God, this is the God, and so on until after hundreds of years, and after hundreds and hundreds and many centuries, little by little people completely forgot about the existence of God, and their entire worship, their entire focus went to worshiping these stars, and then eventually it became all kinds of idols, and it became a whole industry where people just completely forgot about the existence of God, and they just went completely to pure idol worship, even stones and images and figurines and so on and so forth. That was the development that's how it developed over 2 millennium, until the time of Abraham. Now look on the screen, the second paragraph right over here. The wise men among them would think that there is no God other than the stars and spheres, for whose sake and in resemblance of which they had made these images. The eternal rock was not recognized or known by anyone in the world, meaning no one knew about God anymore, with the exception of a few individuals, for example, Chanoch, Methuselah, Noah, Shem, and Aver. The world continued in this fashion until the pillar of the world, the patriarch Abraham, was born. When was Abraham born? Abraham was born in the year 1948 from creation. Means at the end of 2,000 years. And Rambam, I'm going to read one more piece, and then we'll just continue. Then we'll close this Rambam. After this mighty man was weaned, he began to explore and think. Though he was a child, he began to think incessantly throughout the day and night, wondering how is it possible for the sphere to continue to revolve without having anyone controlling it? Who is causing it to revolve? Surely it does not cause itself to revolve. Basically, Rambam saying that Abraham started as a small child to begin to realize that this whole idea, that the concept of idol worship, he began to go back all the way to the source. How does this all happen? And there must be a supreme ruler who runs the world. And that's how little by little. Now, Abraham himself, we're told, was an idol worshiper himself in his young age. That was the culture. That was the world he was born into. So that's all he knew. But then eventually, when he was a little child, he began to think. And over time, he began to realize that all this is silliness, and there's only one true God. and to him is it worthy to serve and to worship, and that's how the concept of belief in God was returned to the world. And Abraham, but unlike the others, Adam, Enoch, Hanoch, and Methuselah, who kept it to themselves, even though they believed in it, Abraham made it a point to not keep this a secret, but to promote this belief system by the myriads and by the thousands, the myriads, and he began to promote this belief, to lecture and give open lectures in public, and he began to teach little by little about God, and the people began to follow him, and that's how Abraham began to teach and to promote and promulgate the idea of monotheism in this world. We all know that Abraham brought monotheism to the world, but this is the history of it. This is how he did it. Now, I just want to mention, I asked before, what is so wrong with praising the sun and praising the moon and recognizing their contributions to society and to the world? After all, God gave them the power to bring about such beneficence to the world. So the answer is obviously because the sun and the moon have no freedom of choice. The reason we honor our parents is because they had the choice to bring us to the world or not. When you go to a restaurant and a waiter serves you wine or the main course or whatever she is serving you, you're going to thank them, even though that's not their wine and it's not their food. It belongs to the owner of the restaurant. They're just a messenger. They're just a ministering, the middleman. But nevertheless you thank them because they could have chosen not to serve it to you. They had the freedom of choice. When someone has freedom of choice and he chooses to do a good deed, you thank him. That's the right thing to do. But the sun, the moon, and the other spheres do not have freedom of choice. And when you start thanking and praising an entity, a force that doesn't have freedom of choice, you are worshiping an idol. That's the essence of idol worship, where you give power unnecessarily to a force that doesn't really have that power. So the sun, the moon, in the words of the Rambam, is like the hammer in the hand of the wood chopper. Meaning to say, when a carpenter starts building and he builds you a bookcase, and he does it with hammer and sheetrock and all that, and he knocks nails, right? You're going to thank the hammer for doing such a good job? Of course not, because the hammer is just a tool in the hands of the carpenter. So who do you have to thank? The carpenter, because he could have said, no, I'm not showing up today to work. He did show up to work. He could have not shown up to work, so you owe him a debt of gratitude. That's why we thank our parents, our waiters, our carpenters, people that do nice things for us. Even though they're getting paid and they're being told to do it, they have freedom of choice. All the other spheres do not. And that's why you're not allowed to worship any of them or give them any kind of credit or credence or unnecessary, to elevate them to a status that they do not have. So that's what Abraham brought to the world. He brought back the faith in God, but he brought it back to the masses. And he paid a great price for it. We know the Medrash tells us that he was threatened, his life was threatened, and he was saved miraculously from the threat. They wanted to kill him, and he literally put his life on the line to promote godliness in this world. And Abraham was the first, and that's why he became the paradigm and the first Jew. He became the first Jew because of this. So now that we mentioned where Abraham came from and what environment he grew up and what his main contribution to the world was, and he had many contributions, as I will discuss now. So now let's begin to read the first portion of Lech Lecha. I'm going to put it on the screen. Let me shut this one. How do you do this? Wait a second. Let me get rid of this. Fair. Okay. I'm going to do another screen share. It's going to be the next one. See if I can find it. Okay, let's do it right. It's right here. Okay. No, this is not it. Sorry about that, my friends. Just give me another second. I'm a little new at this. Right here it is. Okay, you see it?
Yes.
This is the beginning of the portion of Lech Lecha. Let's read the opening verse of this week's portion. Vayomer Hashem, God said, let's read it in English. Hashem said to Abraham, go for yourself from your land, from your birthplace, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. God tells Abraham, he's at the age of 75 years old. He's been working for the last 72 years in finding God, recognizing God. It says that he first recognized God at the age of 3. And later on, he began to understand it on a more sophisticated level, and he began to teach it. And it says that he gathered tens and tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of people around him to believe in God and so on. And he made a great difference in his time. He turned the whole society away from idol worship, or a great part of society away from idol worship, to the belief in God. So now at age 75, Hashem says to him, go away from your land, from where you were born, and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you. Of course, which land is God going to show him? Of course, this is the land of Israel. Then God continues, and I will make of you a great nation. I want to read this verse 2 a little slower, because there's a lot of interesting points here. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And you will be a blessing. Now, when you analyze this verse, a few details here, but they really look like they're redundant. Let's read that again. I will make of you a great nation. All right, that's good. He's going to have a lot of people come from him. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. It kind of sounds like a little bit, the same idea, but in 4 different ways of saying it, right? Or is it that way? So Rashi asks this question. Let's read this Rashi here. It's right in front of you, okay? Rashi points out, he quotes the verse, and you will be a blessing. And he says like this, God's telling Abraham, the blessings are put into your hand. Until now they were in my hand. I blessed Adam, I blessed Noah, and you, I blessed you. But from now on, you will be blessed. You will bless whomever you wish. Okay, that's one interpretation of Rashi. The second thing Rashi says, and this is the one I want to zero in on. Alternatively, what's happening in this verse is God's telling him 4 expressions. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. And I will make your name great. And you will be a blessing. Those are the 4 things that are quoted in the verse. So Rashi says each one has a different meaning. Let's read it. Alternatively, and I will make you a great nation. This is a reference to that which they say in the Shemona Esrei, in the Amidah prayer every day, the God of Abraham. Then, in the second expression in the verse, and I will bless you. This is a reference to that which they say in the Shemona Esrei, the God of Isaac. I will make the third expression. I'll make your name great. This is a reference to that which they say in the Amidah prayer, the God of Jacob. Now, one might be able to think that they conclude the blessing with all 3, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There to teach us otherwise, the verse then says the 4th expression, and you will be a blessing, which implies with you, Abraham, they conclude the blessing, but not with them. Now, this is a little cryptic, so let me explain what's going on over here. If you ever read the Amidah prayer, and this is we say 3 times a day, 365 days a year. Every Amida prayer begins, has many different blessings in it. And the weekday Amida has 19 blessings. The Shabbos and the holidays has 7 blessings. But the common denominator between all the Amida prayers is that the first blessing is the same by everyone. What's that blessing? That's the blessing of what this Rashi is referring to. Over there we say, "Blessed are you, God, our God and the God of our fathers." And we make mention of each one of the fathers separately. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. We make mention of each one of them, even though we said before, right in the beginning, God and the God of our fathers. We specifically enumerate the 3 fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. How does that blessing end? We say another few lines, and then it ends, "Blessed are you, God, the shield of Abraham." That's how this blessing ends. So Rashi is saying like this, that the 4 expressions of this verse, the 4 blessings that God gives over here to Abraham, he's saying like this. When he says, "I'll make you a great nation," this is why we say in the Amidah, the God of Abraham. When we say, "I will bless you," the additional "I will bless you," this is a reference to that which we say in the Amidah, the God of Isaac. "I will make your name great," the 3rd expression, this is a reference to the God of Jacob that we say in that prayer, the God of Jacob. But then he says, but you might think that how do we end the blessing? We should also end it off by saying, "Blessed are you, God, the shield of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." So he says, no. That's the 4th expression in this verse where it says, "And you will be a blessing." Meaning, they will end the blessing mentioning only your name and not Isaac and Jacob. Now this is a little difficult to understand. I mean, I get the whole idea that God is telling Abraham how wonderful he's going to bless him, he's going to bless. He's got to be the God of Abraham, he's going to make his name great, that's a reference to Isaac and Jacob, and so on and so forth. And we mentioned them all, it's great. Now, then Rashi said, but I wanted me to just so that you, in case Abraham will think that the ending of the blessing will also be all 3, no. Over there I'm telling you, you will be the blessing, meaning you, Abraham only, and that's why we say, "Blessed are you, God, the shield of Abraham." You think Abraham cares? You think it bothers him if his child and grandchild, Isaac and Jacob, are also mentioned in the ending of that blessing? What is God trying to tell him? That no, I'm not going to have you end the blessing. It's not going to end with all 3. It's only going to end with you. It sounds like there's some kind of jealousy over here or competition. You know, I'm going to mention Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the beginning, but at the end, Abraham, I'm calming him down by saying, don't worry, only you're going to be mentioned at the end. What is the problem? He cares if he's mentioned together with Isaac and Jacob. You think Abraham would be offended if the blessing ended, Baruch atah Hashem, Mogen Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov? And the question is, why indeed doesn't it end exactly the way it began? We open up the blessing mentioning all 3. And we end it only mentioning Abraham. So what's going on over here, and what does God mean over here, and what's the underlying message here? So I'll share with you an insight I read in a book once, and it was elaborated in other sources as follows. You all know that in the first Mishnah in the Pirkei Avot, let me close this now because I don't think we need this anymore. We all know that in the first Mishnah in the Pirkei Avot, it says that there are 3 pillars upon which the world stands, right? What are the 3 pillars? 3 pillars are Torah, Avoda, and Gemilut Chasadim. That means the Mishnah tells us that the world stands on the merit of three ideas: Torah study, prayer, sacrifice, and sharing, giving, charity, kindness, benevolence. And without these 3, the world comes to an end. Where do we get these three things from? What are these three values? So we know that we learn in other sources that these three pillars correspond to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham is the pillar of chesed, of kindness, of benevolence, of charity. As we learn in the Torah, we learn it in this week's portion, and as next week's portion, Abraham was exceptionally giving, and he had no limits to his giving. He fed everyone. He invited everyone into his tent. He was just an unadulterated giving. He made no distinction. You're a good person. You're not a good person. He didn't ask questions. You came to his door. He gave you what you needed. He just gave and gave and gave and gave. He exemplified the idea. In fact, the Medrash tells us something extraordinary, that God has the 10 attributes, the 10 divine attributes: kindness, love, fear. So it says that God's attribute of kindness came to God and complained and said, "Ever since you created Abraham, I lost my job because he took me over. He does all the kindness in the world. There's almost no need for me anymore." In other words, Abraham was the manifestation of God's attribute of kindness. He almost took away the job of chesed. He exemplified chesed to the nth degree. That was Abraham. Isaac represented avodah, the middle pillar, which is service, sacrifice. We all know Isaac was the one that sacrificed his life, or was ready to sacrifice his life, by the famous story of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac on the altar, where Abraham took him and he was ready to offer him as an offering. I mean, Yitzchak represents the idea of divine service and sacrifice, and so he's also associated with prayer. This idea of avodah is not only sacrifice, but it's also the idea of prayer and heartfelt prayer, which prayer really means the perfection of self, giving of yourself to God, personal dedication, and so on. And because we find in the Chumash, in the Torah, where it's Yitzchak, we find certain expressions where Yitzchak went out to pray, it says. So Yitzchak is associated with prayer, that idea of self-discipline, sacrifice, and so on, which is what prayer is. Yaakov, on the other hand, represents the third pillar, which is the study of Torah. We know that when Yaakov was born, the very next thing that tells us after he was born is that he was a man of the tents. What are the tents? The tents of learning. He sat and learned. That was his modus operandi. He learned. That was his thing. Complete dedication to Torah study. So the three forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, represent these three important values of study of Torah, service of prayer and sacrifice, and benevolence, giving, charity, and kindness. Abraham being the one of kindness. So here's what one of the commentaries explains about this above mentioned Rashi that we just read. That when God tells Abraham, I'm going to give you a triple blessing, and again the words are, and I will make you a great nation. That's Abraham. I will bless you. That's prayer, Yitzchak. I will make you your name great. That's Jacob, Torah learning. He gives him all three blessings. Your children, meaning your nation, the nation of the Jewish people, are going to be a people that are blessed with these three great values. With these three great values. And the truth of the matter is that over the history, over the millennium, the Jewish people indeed exemplified these three important values. We always clung to the books. There's no greater nation than the Jewish people, who have contributed so much knowledge and Torah and godliness to the world like the Jewish people. All other religions today are based on the Jewish Bible, on the Bible, on the Torah, and the Old Testament that the Jewish people brought to the world. And we pored over those pages, and we analyzed them, and we came up with we wrote the Mishnah, and we wrote the Talmud, and we wrote the Kabbalah, and there's no end to Jewish literature, more than any other society in the world. Now, we're the smallest of all societies, as we know, the fewest. Yet we've been able to contribute in the world of Torah like no other people. No doubt, the banner of Jacob has carried the Jewish people through the exile, through the millennium, in good times as in bad times and so on. We never gave that up. The same with prayer. The Jewish people have been dedicated to the service of God, to davening. Every single day we have it as part of our tradition, as a part of our daily routine, to daven not only once a day, but 3 times a day, and especially with the advent of the Hasidic movement, which brought the concept of prayer onto a whole new level, where prayer became a major emphasis in Jewish life. And there's no doubt that the banner of Yitzchak, of prayer, that middle pillar, has become one of the great blessings of the Jewish people. And we brought it to the world, there's no doubt about that. And the same, of course, with charity. Is there a people, like the Jewish people, who are so giving and so charitable? I mean, Jewish philanthropy is legendary. Everyone knows that. And this has been a tremendous value throughout Jewish history as well. And as I mentioned, in good times and bad times as well as in good times. You read Jewish literature on the idea of tzedakah, there's no end to it's one of the greatest, the most important values. In fact, our sages tell us that when you find in the Torah literature the word ha-mitzvah, the mitzvah, which mitzvah is the Torah talking about? Tzedakah. Tzedakah is the greatest mitzvah of the Torah. Tzedakah meaning charity. So these 3 blessings God gave to Abraham. He said, you and your children and your grandchildren are going to bring to the world these great blessings. And when we say in the beginning of the Amidah, blessed are you, God, our God, and the God of our fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, this is the way Jews, we have always connected to God through these 3 methods. We found God in Torah, we found God in prayer, and we found God in charitable giving. But here comes the interesting statement that Rashi makes. Just unless you think, one might be able to think that they will conclude the blessing with all of them, that we should end that first blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem, Magen Avram, Yitzchak v'Yaakov, we should say, blessed are you God, the shield of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Rashi says no. You will not end the blessing with all 3. You will end the blessing with only Abraham, the shield of Abraham. And they asked the question, what does this mean? What is it? You think why is that some kind of big promise to Abraham that we're going to end off the blessing only with his name? You think he's jealous of his son and his grandson, as I mentioned before. What kind of what is the issue over here? Well, what the commentaries explain is that the ending of the blessing, there's 2 things that they explain. One is that when he says would conclude the blessing, in Hebrew it's chesmi, yachal yiyu chesmim b'kulam. You would think that we would conclude with all of them. Teach us otherwise. It says you will be the blessing. You, Avram, will be the blessing. We will conclude with you. Concluding over here is a reference to the end of time. To the end of time. To right before the coming of Mashiach. What God is telling Abraham over here is as follows. There were good times among the Jewish people that all 3 pillars were very, very solid, were very strong among us. He says there's going to come a time at the end of exile, which I believe, of course, is our day and age, and this is so true, where the banner of Abraham, where the banner of Isaac and Jacob are a little rusty today. How many Jews know how to daven? How many Jews know how to learn Torah today? I once heard a joke. It's a joke. It's not a joke. It's a little bit of a joke. They tell the story of that there's a parent that enrolled his son into a Hebrew school, an afternoon Hebrew school. And after a few weeks, the son came home, and the father decided he's going to find out, ask his son, how's his Hebrew school experience? He asked him, he wanted to know if he's learning. He says, how's it going there? Are you learning? He says, yeah, I love it. We're learning so much about Judaism and so on, this and that. My teacher teaches us. It's great. So he wanted to see if he, what kind of knowledge he's gaining in this Hebrew school. So he asked him, tell me, who broke the 2 tablets? Now, the son didn't know where this question was coming from. He thought, he got all frightened. So he told his father, Dad, I promise you it wasn't me. I didn't break anything. You can imagine the father was heart sunk. His son doesn't even know what he's asking him, the 2 tablets. You think I'm talking about it right now, and he's excusing himself. It wasn't him. He is infuriated. I'm wasting my money. What kind of school is this? The kid doesn't even know what I'm talking about. See, he goes to the next Sunday. He goes to the temple, and he goes to the teacher. He says, "Are you Miss Betty?" And he says, "Yeah, I teach your son." And what he says, "I have a big complaint." He says, "I asked him who broke the tablets, and he said it wasn't him." So the teacher says to the father, he said, "What kind of school is this?" He said, the father says, "I asked him who broke the tablets," and he says he doesn't know. It wasn't him. What kind of a thing is this? So the teacher sits with the father and says to him like this, "I know your son for a number of weeks already, and he's a very, very refined child, and he's a very honest child, and I can guarantee you that if he told you it wasn't him, it wasn't him." You can imagine now the father's blood is boiling, and he storms into the principals, the head of the Hebrew school, and he tells him, "What kind of school are you running over here?" "I asked my son, and I go to the teacher, and she says this to me, and that's it." So the principal tells the father, he says, "Listen, I understand your frustration and all." He says, "I cannot tell you what's the story with that, but he says, I can promise you, and I take it upon myself, that if you go and fix the tablets, give us a receipt and we'll pay for it." So the banner of Yaakov, of Torah study, has been a little bit rusty in the last who knows how many years, right? Lech Yaakov is a little bit, not too many Jews are connecting to God through the value of Jacob. How many Jews know how to read Hebrew today? Let alone how to open up a Mishnah and read a Mishnah and understand it. How many Jews, if you ask them who broke the tablets, don't know what you're talking about? They think there's something happened just now. How many Jews know how to daven? So many Jews come to daven and they come to the synagogue and it's not relevant to them. It's a boring experience for them. They really don't appreciate it. They fall asleep. They're not there. They're there because maybe there's a nice kiddush after services, so they come to have the kiddush, or whatever the reason is. Tradition, their father wants them to come, they got used to it. But the experience of davening is lacking greatly. Lech Yitzchak, the God of Yitzchak, the connection to God through the banner and the value of Yitzchak is lacking greatly today. But God made a promise to Abraham that before the end of time, before Mashiach comes, Yechesmin, at the conclusion of the blessing, at the conclusion of history, this one banner will not be lost to the Jewish people. This banner will always be there, and it'll be strong as ever. And indeed, maybe even stronger than ever. I once heard the Rebbe said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe once said, he spoke about the different countries and different eras, and he said like this. He said that the strength of Poland and Eastern Europe was that the Jews of that time and that place excelled in the area of learning Torah and davening. Every place that Rebbe says has its strength, has its energy. The Rebbe said America in the 20th century, he spoke then in the 60s, he said the America in the 20th century, and of course in the 21st as well, this is the place of charity. Elokei Avram, the God of Abraham, is strong as ever. Jews have been known to give charity to all kinds of causes. Well, when it comes to the causes, what Jews gave to, that we can have a conversation if sometimes we're not a little misguided. I'm not sure that the Jews should have their name on the on the Society of Saving the Whales. I'm not sure that Jewish money has to go to that or to other such thing. I once went to the zoo here in Miami. I'm not joking. I went once with my family into Miami, to the Miami Zoo, and every second they have over there the philanthropists, the bricks on the floor with names on the bricks, right? It's all Cohen, Finkelstein. It's all Jewish names. For the Zoological Society of Miami is full of Jewish money. Well, we can have a conversation whether or not our money should go for that or it should go for other things. But be that as it may, one thing is certain, that the money, that Jewish money we're giving away our money. We are the Elekei Avraham, Magen Avraham, that shield of Abraham, that which protected the Jewish people. The value of tzedakah is alive and well among the Jewish people, perhaps even more than it ever was. Maybe because circumstances, because we have the ability today to give more than we ever did. But that a value of Avraham, which exemplifies, which we're going to learn about him in the next 3 portions, what a tremendous paradigm of charitable giving this man was, that he bequeathed to every single Jew till the end of time, and that's the blessing that God tells him. It's going to always remain with the Jewish people. That at the end of time, Torah study may be a little bit choppy. Prayer may be a little boring. Charitable giving, they will grow. That will become stronger and stronger by them. That's why we end the blessing, Magen Avraham, the shield of Abraham. What shielded us throughout history so that we should always remain one with Hashem? Charitable giving. The concept of Gemilut Chasadim, giving. Now, we have to channel our giving into right causes and so on and so forth. We have to make sure that, we are supporting the right institutions, Torah institutions, and so on, for sure. But we are one of the greatest, societies or people in terms of giving. There's no one greater than the Jewish people. That's one point. The second point I want to say is about the conclusion of that blessing with the Magen Avraham and not with the other two, is when you start measuring, at the end of the day, what is the ultimate value of the Jewish people? What is the ultimate value? Yes, we begin the blessing with the Kei Avram, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. We are givers, we are sacrificers, we are Torah learners, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, what is the sign of a Jew? What is the value that makes you Jewish? Now, all values are important, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to diminish any value. But what is that one value that if you had to zero in and say, this is it? It is kindness. It is benevolence. It is giving of yourself to others. Because that's the most difficult thing. It's easy to learn. You know why it's easy to learn? Because who doesn't enjoy an intellectual hour? Who doesn't enjoy intellectual stimulation? Even prayer, when you really get into it, it's a joyous experience. But giving away your money that you earned with hard work, that is not easy. That is the most difficult thing. It says, what are the signs of the Jewish people? We see it throughout history. There were societies that tried to convert to become Jewish, and when the sages and the great kings of the time saw that these societies were not benevolent, they rejected them. They could be idol worshippers. They would not reject them over that. They could be lazy. They could be anything. They rejected them over one thing, because what's the ultimate sign of a Jew? Rachmanim, those that are compassionate. Baishanim, they're bashful, they're humble. And Goim Lechasadim, those that are benevolent. Ultimately, that is what wins the day. When you're able to give of yourself, of a piece of yourself to others, what's going to happen is that will save you as a Jew. Because as long as you're giving of yourself, you will eventually return to the other two values as well. And that's the point. It's not to reduce and to diminish, God forbid, learning and davening. And even as the Rebbe said in America, this is the society, the time, the place where the energy is of giving, whereas in Poland, in Eastern Europe, it was more learning on Torah. That was their strength. Our strength is giving. Does he mean to say that we shouldn't strengthen our Torah study? Does he mean to say we shouldn't strengthen our prayer? What he's saying is, this is the energy of our time. You have to tune into the time. You have to live with the time. What's the energy of our time is giving. And through that, you will eventually come to learn, you'll come to daven, you'll eventually develop and strengthen and enhance the other Jewish values as well. It's a question of what brings you, and that's what Hashem is telling Abraham over here. To be a Jew, you're Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But which one does the blessing end with? The first blessing of the Amidah, every day, 3 times a day. It ends with Magen Avram, the shield of Abraham. And this is extremely, extremely important. I want to mention one other thing that's in this portion that relates to this. And that is that the Torah makes mention of the city of Sodom. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And how the terrible, terrible people there were. And eventually, in next week's portion, we're going to learn that God destroys their cities. He completely gets rid of the Sodom. What was the problem with Sodom? When you look at the story of Sodom, it's very interesting. When the rabbis talk about this Sodom and Gomorrah, it doesn't tell us they were murderers, they were rapists, they were thieves. It doesn't say that. That's not that's not the downfall of Sodom. That's not what brought them down. When you look also in the ethics of our fathers, it talks about the midas doim, the midah, meaning the character of Sodom. What's the character of Sodom? It's an interesting Mishnah. Listen to this. The Mishnah says, if a person says, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours, that's a chassid. Right? A person says, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine, that's a rasha, that's a wicked person. When a person says, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours, that's Sodom. That's Sodom. We need to understand that. Why is that? What is it about Sodom, about such a thing? A person says, I'm not looking to take from you. It's yours is yours. I'm not going to go into your house and break in the middle of the night and burglarize you and take what's yours. No, what's yours is yours. But what's mine is mine. There's another thing that it says about Sodom that, I'll cite an example. Talmud talks about, the halacha talks about, imagine a person has an empty piece of property. And he's not leasing it out, he's doing nothing with that property. And then comes a guy and he parks himself on the property, he's homeless, he wants to sleep on the property. He sets himself up a little tent and he sleeps there. Now the owner of the property says, sir, get off my property, I don't want you here. So he says, what's the problem? You're not, who am I disturbing? I'm not disturbing anyone. And he brings him, he says, if you're not going to let me stay, I'm going to take you to adjudicate this at the rabbinical court. And he brings him to the rabbinical court. Now the rabbis tell him, what's the problem? You're not, in the language of the halacha, you are not losing anything. Zenena, he's enjoying it, and you're not losing anything. So what do you care? What was the problem? If you're not losing anything, and he's benefiting, why are you stopping that? Why are you interfering with that? Now, obviously, according to raw halacha, you can't force a guy to let someone be on his property. But the rabbis talk very, very strongly against someone that engages in that kind of selfishness. They call it the midah, the characteristic of Sodom, where someone you're enjoying and I'm not losing. It's one thing if you say, I want to move, I want to take away from you so I can enjoy. No, that's a different thing. But where you're not losing anything, and then and that person is enjoying, he's not disturbing you, why not let it? That's Sodom. So I want to talk about this for a few minutes. We live through. We're living in a political season right now, right? It's called silly season. So one of the big topics in politics in America and in many other countries in the world in general is the idea of socialism, capitalism, this demarcation. And what's the balance? What's the proper balance? Are we a capitalist? Should we be a capitalistic society? Should we be a more socialist society? And so on and so forth. What's the value of each and so on? So I once shared with one of my classes that what really did Sodom in, what really ruined Sodom, and don't get them. I don't want you to misunderstand this because I'm a capitalist, but Sodom was the absolute capitalism. The Talmud tells us, or the Rashi quotes it, the Medrash tells us terrible stories that went on in Sodom. That they passed laws that you're not allowed to give charity. You're not allowed to be hospitable. You're not allowed to help the poor. And if you did, you violated the law, they would punish you very severely. Sometimes even give you the death penalty. And when God saw that, he had enough. He said, I'm destroying this society and finished. Again, that's it. But how did they get to that? You know what they felt? You know what their belief was? You give charity. You know what you're doing when you give a poor person charity? You're spoiling him and you're making him continue to be dependent on others. They said, let him get a job, let him work for a living, and he won't have to get charity. What did they say? Don't give a person a fish, teach him how to fish, right? What is the slogan? There's a saying like that, right? Teach him how to fish rather than give him a fish. Point that we're making is, the ultimate capitalism is where it becomes heartless. Now, I don't know of a place in the world that believes in that kind of system. Of course, there is no society today in the world that is pure capitalism. Every single society that has capitalism also has a tinge of socialism. Meaning, what is socialism? Social network, a social contract, we help the poor, we help the needy. If someone needs a little bit of a help, till you get him on his feet, of course we're there for him. They believed that when you do that, you're ruining society. You're ruining people's ability to be self-sufficient. Keep giving them and they'll never want to go work. They'll never want to become self-sufficient. They like the handout. So they took it to the nth degree, and that's what ruined them. That was the cruelty of it. That was the cruelty of it. In other words, it's the opposite of Abraham. Sodom was the opposite of Abraham. Abraham was about giving, helping. Abraham was helping to the nth degree. It says an interesting thing about Abraham, by the way. That Abraham helped where he shouldn't have helped. What does that mean? He gave without calculation. Just no problem, come to my house, he wrote a check. He wrote a check to everyone. No limits, no questions asked. You know what it says? That the outcome of that, the consequence of that, was that Yishmael emerged from him. Because when the energy of Abraham is given unadulterated, without checks and balances, without a good balance, the end is it ends up in the wrong hands, and you end up with Yishmael. Yishmael was a wild man. He was a terrible person. And the world has suffered a lot from Yishmael throughout the millenniums. The Ishmaelites. That's because Abraham's chesed, his kindness, was without any limits whatsoever. It went in all different directions, even in direction that probably, under normal circumstances, that shouldn't have went in. It says Yaakov was the perfect balance. And that's why Yaakov gave birth to 12 righteous children. He had no one, his bed was complete, as it says. That's the language of the rabbis. Everyone that emerged from him was complete, was a perfect human being. Not so with Abraham, and not so with Yitzchak. Yitzchak gave birth to Esau, which was a terrible person, because he was the opposite. He was very, very strict, too strict. Abraham was too giving, too, imagine today, you have a child, and he's Just give him, right? No, there's no checks and balances. That doesn't end good. So we need balance. So Yaakov brought the balance. It took a few generations to balance all this out to have a perfect situation. But that's not the point I want to bring out. What I want to bring out today is that Sodom was the very opposite of Abraham. Sodom held back. It was a philosophy. It wasn't just pure evil people. We don't want to give. They had a philosophy behind it. They had a whole. They wrote books about their economic system, but it was cruel. Because the Torah's method is, you want to have success, you want to give charity. People need the help, you have to give them the help. Capitalism, but a little social contract. What I say social, I mean charitable giving. We help each other. In Sodom, that became a crime, because their economic system was so extreme to the other side. Only pure capitalism, where no one has the right to ask for a handout. You're starving, you're hungry, go work harder. You can make it. But of course they were wrong, because sometimes people need help, and a lot of times people need help. And the bottom line is that I'd rather have Avram who gives too much than someone that gives too little. But the Jewish value of giving has always been the paradigm Jewish characteristic was giving. And the idea of what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, that sounds okay, but it's not okay at all. You have to, the society has to be interdependent. That's the way God created the world, that we're interdependent. You give me, I give you. We sell to each other. We need each other. It's like the body. It's an organism. That one thing lives off the other. The head needs the feet needs the head. People need each other, and that's a healthy society, and that's the paradigm of giving. So when we say in the beginning of this portion that God blessed Avram and he became the source of all blessing, he became the source of every good character trait there is. And today's days, when we look at the Jewish people today, and people bemoan the fact, the Jewish people, they're so disconnected, they're so ignorant, and there's so little commitment, and so on. To some degree, that may be true. With regard to Yitzchak and Yaakov, that's true. Prayer is taking a big beating. Torah study is taking a big beating. But when you look at the ultimate goal, the ultimate Jewish value, which is Avram, Magen Avram, the shield of Abraham, the shield of Tzedakah, that's what shielded the Jewish people. As long as we give and we continue the banner of Avram, we will always be here. And at the end of days, this is the time we're living in. The greatest Jewish value is being promulgated today more than ever before. Now, that does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that we can neglect Torah study and we can neglect Lech Lecha. We have to always remember that He's the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. We find God in all three of these values, and we have to make sure that we find Him in all three, not just in one. But when you have to zero in on one, which is the ultimate Jewish value? Magen Avram, the shield of Abraham. That's what God was telling Avram. When Mashiach comes, before Mashiach comes at the end of time, and even after Mashiach comes, this will be the greatest value of all time. This will be the great energy of that time. Magen Avram, the idea of charitable giving. And indeed, there's never been a time when people have been so charitable like in the time that we live right now. So I just want to end off. It's 10 to 9 already, so I don't want to go any further. It's late. I want to encourage that we should definitely learn and daven and strengthen ourselves in every area of Torah, of Jewish life. But when we start the story of Abraham, it's important to remember what Abraham exemplified. And he was the first Jew. You know why he was the first Jew? Because he's the person that brought not only monotheism to the world, he brought giving to the world. He brought chesed, kindness, to the world. And chesed ultimately is the most important value for all peoples and especially the Jewish people. And with that, I open up for questions. Anyone that wants to ask a question, of course, be my guest. And if you don't have any questions, we'll call it a night.
One quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Did they ever find out who broke the tablets?
That's a good question. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. Anyway, have a good night, everyone. And we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're starting the JLI. If you want to come for the first lesson for free, I opened it up for everyone. And just let me know so I can send you the source material, because that is not going to be on screen sharing. That I have to send. It's a lot of pages, and it's going to be easier to follow that way. So, all the best to everyone, and good night.
Wonderful. Thank
Those
you,
of you, thanks for watching. We'll be in touch.